Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. I'm Lizzie and I work at the Lapworth Museum of Geology. You are at one of our first family fun events for this summer, our online activities, and we have got activities throughout the summer on different Wednesdays, so keep an eye out on our social media for more activities that you can do as well. You might have joined us before for Lapworth Museum activities online, but if this is your first time visiting us or online doing an activity with us, then just so you know, we use the chat function whenever you've got a question or you want to let us know something, or if you've got a bit of information you'd like to share. As I said previously, the chat function is set so that only myself and Darrell can see what you're typing. So please don't worry if you think, oh, nobody would want to see my question. We want to see your question. We'll help and we'll try and answer it as we go along. And likewise, if you have found something very exciting or you want to tell us a little bit more about something that you know about what we're talking about, pop it in the chat too, because we love to get that conversation going. For those of you who might like to be able to read what we're saying at the same time as we're saying it, we do have the live transcript option running at the moment. Now, for you to get onto that, you can click the three little dots there where it says more, and it should have a live transcript option. If you want to see them, make sure you click for it to say show subtitles. If you want to get rid of them, if they're in the way of what you're looking at, you can also hide the subtitles that way as well. So whatever works best for you. As I've said, this session is being run by Darrell Wakelam. So Darrell is a fantastic artist who makes amazing sculptures and objects out of everyday items. So who knew that you could make a little bit of cardboard and tape into such a fantastic fossil? If you want to share anything that you're doing with us or with Darrell, we have put our social media information up at the top here so that you can see it, and we'll share it as we go along as well. So again, thank you so much for joining us. It's not about me anymore. I'm going to pass over to Darrell and he's going to be able to tell you even more about the amazing things you're going to do today. Okay, so over to Darrell.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic. Right, well, it's lovely to connect with everybody that's here. I hope you enjoy this. My name's Darrell. I'm originally from the West Midlands, so I grew up quite close to the Lapworth Museum myself. I was one of those little boys who was really into fossils, like a lot of young children are, and that led me a very long time later to live on the Jurassic coast. So I live in Lyme Regis, which is very, very famous for fossils. It's where Mary Anning lived all those couple of hundred years ago. She was really the first person who realized that the fossil animals that people were finding here weren't the animals that currently existed, and they actually were animals from a long, long time before. So it's a very famous place. I'm very lucky to live here, and when I'm not doing art, I quite often go down to the beach and I look for things. So when you go down to the beach at Lyme Regis, you can quite often find fossils just sitting in amongst the sand and the pebbles down on the beach. So things like this beautiful ammonite you can see here, sometimes they're larger, sometimes you have to have really good eyesight because they're actually very, very small. And the ammonites are quite common here, but occasionally people find more unusual things. So the kinds of things that Mary Anning and some of those other early fossil hunters found here that got everyone really excited about dinosaurs. So Ichthyosaur skeletons or parts of them are relatively common here, but it's very unusual to find a whole skeleton all still attached together, because the process of them decaying while the body was decaying and also the fossilization of them themselves meant that quite often they're broken up into pieces. So I've got a couple of pieces to show you before we do our artwork. I've got an Ichthyosaur vertebra here, so you can see that's actually part of the dinosaur's backbone, of the animal's backbone. So it would have had obviously loads of these, over 100 of these I think, in its backbone. Okay, so going right the way down to its tail, and they would have all joined together to make its spine. You can actually see the bumps where the ribs would have come off the side of that backbone. And occasionally you find even more exciting things than that. So what I've got here in front of me is a piece of the jawbone of an ichthyosaur. So you can actually see the teeth in that. It's actually on both sides. If I turn it around, you can see the teeth in the other side as well. So that was a broken section of a much longer snout of the animal that we're going to be looking at. So I've got some bits and pieces on the table in front of me. One of the most important things I've got is I've got some pictures to use as a little bit of reference for myself. So obviously all I've done is gone online and typed in Ichthyosaur skeleton or Ichthyosaur fossil, and those have all appeared there. So that's the creature that we're going to try to build. And in real life, when it was alive, it would have looked a lot like these pictures here. So you can see what that creature would have looked like, almost like a cross between a sort of dolphin and a shark and a crocodile. So it's got that long kind of crocodile snout. So to make our model today, I've got a few things here that hopefully you've got as well. You can either do one of three things. You can either make along with me, so you can try and keep up and make the dinosaur as I'm making it, or you can catch up. You can do a few bits, get the idea of it, and then you can do the rest later. Or you can just sit back, put your feet up, watch me do it, and then have a go later on when you've seen how it's done. There's also a little recipe, like a step-by-step recipe, which I know is on the same link as this was. So if you want to go back to that and use it, you can. So on the table for my making, I have obviously got some scissors and some tape. Masking tape is better than sellotape because you can paint over it, but if you've only got sellotape, that's fine. I've also got some bits of card. I've got a strong piece of card that I'm going to use as my backdrop to build on top of, but I've also got a whole load of cardboard here that's all sort of different thicknesses. So I've got some what I call box card, and I've got some thinner cardboard that's almost like kind of cereal box card this, so it's a little bit more flexible. And then the only other thing I've really got that I'm going to use is I've got some straws. Now these are paper straws, so you can see here, very thin paper straws. If you don't have any of those, then there's actually a little cheat you can do where you can make something very similar yourself. If you just take some normal paper like photocopy paper or an old envelope and take a pencil and then roll the paper around the pencil like that, grab a bit of sticky tape and join it together, and then if you slide the pencil back out, you'll have the little paper tubes, and those will be very similar to the ones that I'm going to use to make the backbone. And that's going to be the first piece that we do on our Ichthyosaur skeleton. So what I've done, I've used a white pencil for this so that you can see it. You can use obviously whatever you've got, a pen or a pencil. We need to decide where the backbone of this animal is going to be, and we also need to leave enough room for us to build a skull. It doesn't matter if the head comes off the page a little bit, that's fine, but we need to leave a little bit of space at one side. So all I've done is I've drawn a simple line that goes from where the neck would be, so my skull's going to be round about where that cross is, and I've drawn a line from where the neck is right the way back down to the tail. Now quite often when you look at fossil ichthyosaurs, there's a bit of a kink in the tail, and you can see why, because the bottom part of the tail is the bit that had the spine running through it. So you can see there's an obvious little kink in the tail at the end. So I'm going to draw that on as well. So towards the end of my tail, I'm just going to draw the bottom bit of it as though it's coming down the shape of the tail fin like that. Okay, so we've got our drawing there. We're going to build the spine. So first of all, that's what we're going to use these straws for. So these straws are really good because you can chop them up a little bit so that you get different segments, different vertebrae. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to chop into the straw like this. Chop, chop, chop. Give that a little cut all the way along. You can see what I'm doing. And what that will do is it will make the spine more flexible like that. Okay. If you cut it by accident and it cuts in half, so if you go whoops like that and actually cut it, you can always join bits back together. You could also stick two straws together. So here are two straws that I've taped together, and I'm going to use that too, and I'm just going to chop it like I've just shown you. So we'll chop into it. It's quite nice because you can actually take little chunks out as well. If I do that, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to chop back the other way into it, and if you take little chunks out, it almost looks a little bit more spiky, like that. Okay, so it's almost like I'm chopping little pieces out, you can see. So I'm going to use these to stick on. So first of all, I'm going to use some masking tape. I've got some masking tape ready here, and I'm going to attach this spine onto the background. Now, it's really important when you do this that you push all of the tape down so that it's nicely stuck onto the background, so that when this is finished, you won't actually see the tape at all. So I'm going to take that about halfway along, and then so it looks a little bit more like the tail is getting thinner, I'm then going to use the single bit of straw I've got here. Let's attach that on so that then it gets slightly smaller, and then at the end I'm going to cut that and I'm going to put an even smaller piece. So let's give that a little chop up. There we go. So similar to before, I'm going to chop some little chunks out of it and we'll stick it on. Now, something you will notice that I do a lot when I'm building 3D models is I use a pencil, but not to draw with. I use it to push the tape down into the right places. So I've got a blunt pencil here, so not too sharp. And when I've got those pieces stuck down, I'll use that blunt pencil to push all of the tape down so that it's not going to pop back up again. So because my fingers aren't thin enough to get in these spaces, that helps to push all of that down. So now we've got a sort of backbone shape. We've got our little kink in the end there where the tail would have come off, and that's all fixed down and it's not going to fall off. So that's the first of our 5 pieces that we need to make this ichthyosaur shape. Okay, so feel free to have a go at that. I'm going to get the skull part ready. Don't worry if you fall behind a bit, because you can see how this is done and you've also got the pictures to look back at later. Okay, so I'm going to pop that down for a minute and I'm going to have a go at making a skull. So this time I'm going to use some of this thinner cardboard. So this is the stuff that's a bit more like cereal box card. If you've got cereal boxes or a rice box or something like that, you can just turn it inside out so you haven't got all the print all over it and use the nice flat side. So we need to draw that kind of skull of the ichthyosaur. We need the head shape. So you don't have to draw all the details. I'm going to draw this really simply. If you look at the head of an ichthyosaur, it's very similar to the head of a crocodile. Okay. So it's almost like a pear shape, but it's stretched right out with that long snout. And the skull is split into 2 halves. You've got the top half that's got the eye sockets and the nose, and then you've got the bottom part of the jaw that opens and closes. So I'm going to draw a line across here, but I'm not going to do it in the middle. I'm going to make the top half a little bit bigger than the bottom half, okay? Because obviously with the eye socket in, that half's a little bit larger. Okay, so if we draw roughly where that would be, there would be a big eye socket. It's almost like a bird's skull, isn't it? You can see there. And then just in front of it, there's the kind of nasal cavity. That's the bit where the nose hole would have been, where it would have breathed through. So you're looking at that kind of shape. So I'm going to chop that out. So with my scissors, I'm just going to cut the whole thing out around the edge. Give it a chop. I'll hold this up so you can see. I'm going all the way around that, right the way around, right the way to the end. There we go. Okay, so like that. So you can see how that looks. And then I'm going to chop it into the 2 pieces. So I'm going to turn one piece of the skull into a top and a bottom jaw. So we'll chop that through. And the reason we've done that is to separate them, and also so that you can then decide how open to have the mouth. Okay, so you might want it slightly open, you might want it wider open. Now that's okay, but it's very flat. So we're going to try and make these a bit 3D. So I'm going to show you a couple of tricks for doing that and making them more 3-dimensional. So I'm going to use my scissors to score this with. So you don't need to keep them open. You can close your scissors. I'm going to put this flat on the table, and I'm going to scratch some lines across it. So I'll hold this up so you can see what I mean. If I hold it up to the light, you can see I've scored or scratched some lines across the cardboard, and that allows me to give it a push. And those lines will act like little creases, and they'll make the whole shape get more 3D like that. So you can see almost like a carrot shape like that. And then I'm going to do the same, even though it's quite tricky, I'm going to do the same with the bottom jaw as well. So I'm going to scratch some lines along it. It's quite thin, my piece, maybe a little bit too thin, but that's okay. And I'm going to squeeze that together as well. And then that means that it's starting to become a bit more of a three-dimensional head. And one of the other ways you can do that is to actually chop out the eye and the nose shape. So if I take my scissors, I'm going to cut in from the edge, and I'm going to take that circle right the way out. So I'll go round, round, round like that, spin the cardboard round to the beginning, keep hold of that bit. That's left me with the eye socket. And then I'm going to do the same where the nasal cavity is. So I'm going to take that little triangle shape out like that. Now, the nice thing with this is that those two slits that I've had to make to open those up to cut them out, I can actually use them, because if I overlap this, I might turn it around so that you can see it a bit better. If I overlap it slightly and stick it back together, then it makes the whole skull shape become a little bit more three-dimensional. It's almost going like a little spoon shape. Let's do the same with the other little slit that I've put in, so you can see that one too. We'll pull it together slightly, stick it back together, and then we give that a squeeze. And then we've got our head ready to attach. So let's have a look. So you can see how that is kind of looking. All right, so very much like a kind of crocodile shape. So now I'm going to attach that to the background. I'm going to keep hold of this little circle and put it somewhere safe for a moment. And I'm going to attach this onto where the backbone was joining up to. So if I do that, let's have a look. There we go. So I've just rested it on top of the backbone. I want to keep it 3D, and I don't mind that it's popping off the end of the cardboard a little bit. It's quite nice sometimes if bits come off the end like that. And again, as we said with the spine, when you're doing that, you can swap back and grab your pencil and just scribble along those outside edges so that you know that that is going to stick down really well. Right, so my mouth now can be as wide open as I decide. So I'm going to stick this down on here, and let's make this look like almost like a bird's skull, like I said before. So we'll stick this down, press it all down. That's quite nice like that. Give it a rub, and again, use the pencil. So that's probably the hardest bit to do. You've got the top and bottom of the skull, and you've just scored it and chopped those two holes out. Okay, so you can see how that looks now. It's already starting to look like a creature, isn't it? So this little circle that I chopped out of the eye, we're going to use it because ichthyosaurs, very unusually for an animal, have got a bone inside their eye. Okay, it's called a sclerotic ring, and that was a bone that sat in the back of the eye socket because their eyes were so large. It was one of the animals that had the largest eyes ever. So we're going to use this little circle to make that. So I'm going to give it a little chop. So I'm going to cut some little slits around it so that you can see this. I'm just going to almost take little chunks out, so it's like a little wheel like that. Okay, if you didn't manage to save this bit of card, you can always chop out another circle. It doesn't matter. Okay, so there we go. And by chopping those shapes out now, if I push that over my finger, you can see how it will become a little three-dimensional shape. So I'm going to leave that the white way around, so it's a bit easier for you to see. Now, it's going to be really tricky to tape that inside the eye socket, so I'm going to use a bit of glue. So I've got some glue here. I'll pop a nice blob of glue in there. Now, because I'm holding this up to show you how it looks, this eye might move around or fall out, but I'm going to hope that the glue will stick it into place. But you get the idea by looking at that now. Okay, so that's the skull. We're going to do the third thing we need, which is some teeth. Okay, and the easiest way to do teeth is to actually cut a strip of card so that you know how big the teeth are going to be. So again, I've got some sort of thicker box cards. You can use whatever you like. And I'm going to cut a strip that's about as tall as I want the teeth to be. So all of my teeth are going to be that kind of height. I might make that a slight bit smaller, actually, about that big. And then to make the teeth, I'm going to cut triangles. So I'm going to go across this strip going like that way and then that way. You can see the triangle falling off the end of my scissors. So that way and then that way. And if you do that, if I catch them here on the table, if I do that and go backwards and forwards, chopping, snip, 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 then what I end up with is a load of triangles. There's my load of triangles in my hand, but they are all about the same height. So when I stick these on, they should look quite even. Now, here's a little time-saving trick. So if you stuck those on individually, it'd take quite a while, didn't it, to put all the teeth on. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut corners a little bit. I'm going to put some glue in the ichthyosaur's mouth, like that. So there's some sticky glue in there. And then I'm just going to sprinkle these teeth on like they were glitter. So I'm just going to sprinkle them in the mouth, like that. Okay, now that doesn't look very good at all, because they're all over the place. But you can either use a pencil or the back of a paintbrush. I've got a paintbrush here and I'm going to use the wooden end of the paintbrush, and I'm going to push these teeth so that they are in the right kind of position. So it's quite nice because you can poke them around, you can move them, you can turn them up the other way around, and gradually you'll start to push them into position. So you can see those ones at the front are starting to go where I want them to. So I'm just going to have a little go with these other ones. I'm not bothered about which way around the cardboard is, because this is all going to be painted, so that doesn't matter. So we'll push these ones down. We're nearly there, a couple more. So that's getting more like it. And then let's just do these last few. And if you found that you hadn't got enough teeth in there, you could obviously add some more. I'm going to stop there. But obviously, if I'd got a bit more time, I could make some more. I could even make some really small ones that went right up to the end. Okay. Now, the nice thing with these is that if they're a little bit wobbly, that doesn't matter, because when people find the skeletons of ichthyosaurs, quite often the teeth aren't in a straight line. And as the animal has died, its teeth have shifted slightly as the body decayed. So it doesn't matter if they're a bit wonky and wobbly, that'll do. Okay, so that is nice and quickly, that is the third part of our skeleton already done. So the two things we've got left to do is we need a rib cage for the body, and then we need some flippers. So we need the actual paddles that the animal had instead of legs. Okay, so I'm going to use a bit of cardboard for the ribs. So I'm just going to pop that down again for a moment to dry. And then I'm going to go back to my cardboard here. And what I need for the ribs is I need to cut out some curved shapes for the ribs. So if you look back at the photographs, you can see how, if you look at this top photograph here, you can see how the ribs are really nice and curved. Almost makes me think of like a rainbow shape if you look at that top photograph there. So just going to get a scrap piece of card like this, and I'm going to cut a curve. So I'm going to make the edge of it curved like that. And then every single piece I cut off here, I'm going to try and follow that line. So you end up with lots of these curved thin pieces. So let's do a few. Let's chop these out. And the great thing is it doesn't matter if they're a little bit long, because we can chop them and get them to fit into the size of the ribs that we want. Right, I'll do a few like that. So again, you can see how my piece of cardboard's getting smaller and smaller, and I'm just cutting a curve off. So I've got a whole load of those on the table in front of me. Right, now we need to decide where they go. Again, I'm going to use my white pencil so this shows up. So we need the body shape. So the ribs don't go all the way to the end of the tail. They start somewhere around that kind of area, and they get fatter and fatter as the body gets bigger, and then they go in again. So it almost makes a really nice leaf shape like that. So you can see how it starts just behind the head, and then it tapers and gets smaller and smaller as it goes towards the end of the body. So now there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can either tape these on or you can glue them on. So I'm going to tape the first couple so that you can see that. So I'm going to get my rib and I'm going to put a little bit of tape at the top and a little bit of tape at the bottom. Now, it's best if you don't cover the whole thing with tape, because that'll spoil the effect of the actual ribs being individual. So if you put a bit of tape at the top, a bit of tape at the bottom, and obviously if they're not the right size, you can chop them. So I'll put one on and I'll show you what I mean. If I put that one on, it's obviously too big and long. You can see it's coming lower down than the pencil line I've drawn, so I'm going to chop it off. So I'll get my scissors and cut it off. And the great thing is, if you cut it off and you've got a little bit left over, you can use it for one of the smaller ribs. Now, if you want to be a bit quicker, you can glue them. You need to put quite a thick coat of glue on to sort of grab them. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to put a big blob of glue here at the back. Let's hold that up so you can see that. There we go. So I've put glue all the way over that area. You can see it shining. And then you can take the ribs and you can just push them into the glue and they'll stay there. So let's do that with a few of them, just to fill in that back area there. So we'll give it a chop and a stick like that. Okay, so you can see how that works, yeah, pushing the ribs in. And again, a little bit like the teeth, when you look at the ribs of a creature like this, when it gets fossilized, quite often the ribs have got squashed because they're thin bones. So they tend to break very, very easily. And that means that the ribs very rarely go in straight lines like they would have been when the animal was alive. So sometimes they get kind of bunched up together. And sometimes you get this effect where they curve in a different direction because you've got the ribs that are on the back of the animal and then you've got the ribs that are on the front of the animal. I'll show you what I mean. So if I take exactly the same pieces of cardboard I've been chopping up, but I'm going to put them in a different direction. And you'll see what I mean. They'll look like they're going the other way on the animal. So you've got what's called a rib cage. You've got the hole in the middle where all of those organs would be. So the heart and lungs and things like that. And then you've got the other set of ribs on the other side. So let's have a look. Let's see how that looks. So these are curving the other way. Okay. So you can see there, you've got some are curving that way and some are curving this way. And you can sort of mix and match that together. So it can be some one way and some the other. And then it gradually builds up a rib cage. Right. So to speed up my time, I'm going to use a bit of glue on this front bit. And I'm going to fill in the last of these ribs. So I've got a few more here. Let's see if I've got enough. Let's try some different directions as well, just to mix things up a little bit. And it doesn't matter if some of them are a little bit straighter and less curved. Right, let's put that last one on. Give it a chop. It's nice to use up some of the scraps as well. So if you've got little bits and pieces like these, you can maybe find a little space and drop those in. I'm going to pop that little one there. Right, so we're gradually building up our rib cage. We've got our skull, we've got the tail. So the only other thing I would add before doing the paddle bones is there's one more little bit you can do to the spine while you've got your glue handy. When you look at the pictures, ichthyosaurs have got these little kind of, they're called neural arches. They're almost like little bones that stick up along their back. So right along the ridge of their back. And if you've got any of the straws left over, you could easily chop these straws into little pieces. I'm going to almost do it like bits of pasta. So I'm going to get my straw and I'm going to chop these out. So little segments. I'll hold these up so you can see them. So they look like tiny little pieces of pasta, look. And then you could use those to make those little neural arches going across the top of the spine. So I'll have a quick go. I'm not going to do all of them because they gradually go down the spine, but I'm going to do the first few to show you. So we'll get a bit more glue. We'll pop that along the top of the spine. I'm going to leave it quite thick, the glue, so it grabs onto what we're making. So you can see that line of glue I've put across the top. And I'm going to put these on so that they are like a little row of bones that are sticking up. So let's have a try. I'll turn this around. So there's the first 3. Let's put a few more on. So like a lot of things like this, if you'd got a lot more time on your hands, you could make these bones get smaller and smaller as they went down the spine. By the time you get to the end of the spine, they will have disappeared entirely. If I try and show you that on this middle picture, the spines are there on that bit. By the time you get back to the end of the tail, there aren't any, and it's disappeared. Okay, so it's a feature that kind of gets smaller as it goes down the spine, but you can see the effect of that. That works quite nicely. Okay, so I'm going to just stop again very quickly, grab my pencil. I'm going to just scribble on those few bits of tape that I've added since last time I did that. There we go. All right. And that's ready now for the flippers or paddles. When you talk about an ichthyosaur, they tend to call them paddles, rather than if it was a dolphin, you'd say flippers, wouldn't you? So it's got 4 of them. It's got 2 at the front and 2 at the back. That's different to a dolphin as well, because dolphins have only got them at the front. So the 2 at the front are slightly bigger, the 2 at the back are slightly smaller. So again, I'm going to pop that down for a minute. Let's have a little look on the picture at those flippers or paddles. So you can see them here. So they look a bit like a leaf shape, but it's made up of lots and lots of tiny bones. They almost look like little coins, don't they, there, that are all scattered around. So we're going to try and make these leaf shapes, and we're going to try and chop them so that they look a little bit more like they do in that picture. So I've got some slightly thicker card for this because I'm going to use it. I'm going to score it as well, but I'm going to chop a leaf shape out of here. Okay, so chop it right out like that. And I want 2 about the same size for the front of my ichthyosaur. So you could either cut round it. That's what I'm doing. I'm putting 2 together and cutting around it, or you could draw around it with a pencil. It doesn't have to be perfect, so I'm only going to do it quite rough like that. So we've got 2 of the paddle bones. And then to make them look a bit more 3D, you could just stick them on. So you could just go, right, we'll stick those on like the flippers, okay? But I'm going to make them look a bit more 3-dimensional, which is quite good fun. So I'm going to score them like I did for the head. So I'm going to take my cardboard shape and scratch it with my scissors. I need to put it down on the table, so I'll hold it up to show you this. So I'm almost pretending to cut right the way through it. You can see like that, okay? So we've got that kind of shape to it. And then I'm going to cut this almost all the way through. So if I hold it here like this, I'm going to snip almost all the way through, right up to the top, all the way along. And what that does is it makes it look a lot more flexible, and it makes it look like separate bones, almost like that. So I'll very quickly do that to the other one. So I'm going to pop it on the table, scratch some lines down it with the scissors. So again, like that, give it a squeeze together, and then give it a chop. So chop, chop, chop as you go along, like that, like that, like that. There we go. And then we've got those really nice flexible shapes. So let's attach them on. So these are the front 2. So let's grab a bit of sticky tape. You could do this with glue, you could do it with tape. So you could just put a nice blob of glue and attach these on, but I'm going to use a bit of sticky tape on mine so that I can move them around a little bit as well. So I'm not going to spoil them by putting tape all over the top of them. I'm going to put my tape right at the edges. So let's have a look. So like that. So I've put a bit of tape here. I've put a bit of tape there. I'm going to use my pencil to push that tape down into the gaps. And then I'm going to pop the other flipper or paddle on there too. Now, sometimes when these creatures have fossilized, then their flippers might be in quite unusual positions. Sometimes they're even laying on top of each other, like the animal had landed on the sea floor, and sometimes they are separate. So I'm going to put mine quite close together like that. Again, give it a bit of a scribble. So the way I've done it, mine have overlapped slightly, like you can see there. And now I'm going to do the two smaller ones. So exactly the same process. I'm going to do it a little bit quicker. Smaller leaf shape. Here we go. There's one. Let's chop another one out. Sometimes you can use the first one as a bit of a guide so you can see the size that you want to cut. And then we'll do the same process on these. So we'll scratch them and then chop some lines into them. So there's the scratching. And there, I'll hold these up for you too. So we've got those two like that. And then chop back into them. So I'll do both of those a little bit quicker. There's one there. And we'll do a quick one like that. Okay. So that's the two sort of last pieces that we really need to stick on. So I'm going to use a bit of masking tape as well. Like I said, you can glue them if you'd rather. It depends on how quickly you want to get them fixed down. Right, that looks pretty good. Okay, now the only thing you could do if you've got a bit of scrap card or leftover card left is sometimes at the top of these paddle bones there's almost like a bit of a shoulder bone or a pelvic bone that those flippers are attached to. So you could grab a spare piece of card. I've got a piece of card here, and you can add those pieces on. So the top bone sometimes looks a bit, it's almost like a bit like an axe head shape, like a sort of triangular shape. I'm going to just use a bit of glue for that part, I think. We'll pop that on and place that at the top. And again, if you're using some photographs as reference, you might spot those bones again. You can see there's a couple of bones right where my finger's pointing there, and those would have been what these flippers were joined onto. Okay, so I've just added that kind of triangular shape at the top of the bone there. Now, if you've got time, you could add to this, couldn't you? You could add some smaller teeth. So let's go back very quickly. Let's say I wanted to add some smaller teeth in the end of there. I'm going to grab a little strip of card, chop some smaller teeth, and I could add them on. I could carry on those little arches across the top of the back, so I could glue down some more of those. I could make my ribs look even more 3D by gluing some more strips of those over the top so that there was even more in there. Or even things like making the tail even longer. So let's say I wanted the tail to get even thinner and smaller at the end, then I could take a little tiny thin piece of card like that. I could chop it into some little segments, and I could make the tail get even longer. So these things are really relying on how much time you've got and how detailed you want your skeleton to be. So all I'm doing now is getting tiny, tiny little bits of card and gluing them onto the end of the tail. You can see just down there where my finger is. Let's put one more on there. And then I'll put these slightly smaller teeth in as well. Okay, so there's the tiny little tail. So you can see the reason I was saying about smaller teeth is the jaw here gets a little bit thinner as it goes round the eye socket. So let's drop some smaller teeth in that part there. Like I said before, sometimes easier to just sprinkle a couple of them in like that, and then use either a pencil or a paintbrush to move them around where you want them. Do a little bit of dinosaur dentistry, make sure their teeth are all nice and firm. There we go. So I've added these teeth here, these little ones. Okay, so lots more things you can add, but that's pretty much the 5 stages that I'm going to do for my ichthyosaur. So if you remember, we've done the spine or backbone with the tail. We've then added a skull. We've then used the piece that came out of the eye to make a little eye socket, and we've chopped up some teeth. Then we've done some ribs by cutting a rainbow shaped bit of card, chopping it into sections and fixing them on. And then last but not least, we've got the 4 paddles, which are made out of those leaf shapes. Okay, so that now is ready for us to add some colour on. Now, luckily, because mine's still wet, I've got some versions that I've already been working on. So I know some of you will have seen the one that was finished, which I think you might have seen me painting on the advert for this little session. So that's that one we can see there, and you can see that's made exactly the same way as yours have been. There's the straws there, there's the cardboard ribs, there's the little paddle bones. But I've also got one that's kind of half finished as well, so you can see how that's been finished off. So you can see it exactly as it is now, and then you can see what happens when it gets painted. So you can either paint it straight away, you can take the one that you've made and you can paint it, or there's one other thing that you can do to make these a little bit stronger if you want to. So the only bit of this at the moment that's making the whole model look a bit messy is the tape. So the tape that's sticking out over the edges makes the whole thing look a bit rough and messy, doesn't it? So there's a way you can cover that over. If you go back to your box cardboard, so the thicker cardboard is made up of 3 layers. You have this kind of corrugated layer, which is this bumpy layer, and then you have the outside layer, which is what I call the skin. And you can tear them off, so you can separate them. Sometimes it doesn't rip in one go, and you have to kind of peel a few little bits off at a time. So sometimes, like this, it will actually tear through. Now, this cardboard skin is brilliant because you can use it to hide some of the masking tape. So I'm ripping it up into pieces. I've got my glue here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of that skin of the cardboard to hide some of these bits of tape that I don't want to see. So right by the skull there, if we take a bit of this paper and we pop it along there like that. Now, because it's the same kind of colour as the cardboard, it will almost disappear into it, whereas the masking tape doesn't. So if we pop a little bit there, I'll use a little bit of water as well, so it's a bit clearer for you to see. So we can see underneath the jaw now, those bits of masking tape have started to disappear. I think there's one still showing in the middle. We'll just cover that over. Now it's gone. Let's have a look at this top bit then. So up here, there's a big bit of masking tape there at the top that I want to hide. So I'm going to put my glue on first. Take a bit of the cardboard skin, pop it right over it there. You can see what I've done. And then carefully, I'm going to use my glue to glue over the top of that. And as if by magic, it almost disappears. Now, if you've got time, you could carry on doing that. And if you've got the patience, you could cover over lots of the smaller bits of tape that are sticking out as well. I've got some at the back here, and I've got some right down by the tail. You can see how that would look loads better down by the tail if I got rid of those bits of masking tape. So let's put one piece of the cardboard skin at the top. There it is. And let's put another one underneath where that other bit is sticking out from behind the tail bones. There it is. Okay. So again, if I get a bit of water on my brush just to make the glue go a bit more see-through, you can see how that works on the tail and makes it neater. So if you've got some time, you could spend time doing that on the other parts as well. You could get rid of these other bits of masking tape that are showing up. If you wanted to make it stronger, you could put a little wash of glue over the whole thing and then put it outside in the sun and let it dry off. Okay, right, that one I'm definitely going to pop to one side, and I'm going to grab this one back again. And you can now see where I've used these bits of the cardboard skin on this one to make it a little bit stronger. So you can see here, you can also see a little bit further along. And then what I've done is I've painted the whole thing one colour. So I've put an undercoat on the whole skeleton and the background. And this is because it's easier to do that than to paint around the skeleton. That's much, much harder. So it's easier to put a wash of a kind of stony colour on first, and then you can paint the fossil back in again afterwards. So I'm just going to swap. So I've got some paints. So in my palette here, I've just got some regular sort of squeezy paints, just like you use at school. I've got a bit of water, and I've got some different sized brushes. So if you imagine I hadn't even started to paint this, all I would do is mix up a grey, which is just black and white on my brush. I've got both of them there. Pop it on and make sure you jiggle your brush around so that the paint goes in all of the gaps. So it's almost like brushing your teeth. You've got to push the paint into all the spaces. So I'll do a bit that hasn't been done yet. Let's grab a bit of black and white, pop it on this bit, and we'll jiggle the brush around, and that paint will go into all of the spaces. And the nice thing is you can use different shades of grey. Obviously, if it goes a bit dark, so if I put that on, that's almost black. If I take a bit of white on my brush, put it on top, it will gradually mix in, look, and make it a similar colour. So we'll pop that on. Okay. So you obviously have to wait a little bit of time for it to dry to do this, because otherwise you'd be knocking all the bits off that you've already made. So if you give it a couple of hours to dry when you've done your making, then this will be a lot easier to do. Okay, so I'll jiggle my brush around, get it in all of those. So imagine I've gone right the way across that skeleton to the very end, to the tip of the tail, and then you don't really have to wait to do this, but if you keep your grey brush separate, so I'm going to put that to one side, I'm going to get a smaller brush. There it is. And in my palette, I've also got some brown and gold colours as well. Now, if you look back at the fossil that I was showing you before of the jawbone, you can see how the fossil itself is very dark, okay? Bits of it look almost black, bits look kind of like a chocolatey brown colour. So the brown I've got here is quite a kind of reddish brown. So if I pop a little bit of that on the skull, you'll see what I mean. It's that kind of colour. So if I wanted to make it a bit more of a darker brown, I would grab a bit of black on my brush as well, and I would make that a lot darker like that. Okay, so I'm going to blend that in. And the nice thing about painting something 3D is you can feel where the edges of things are. So as you're painting it, it gets easier to know where the edges are. And the other benefit is if you go wrong, you can fix it. So if when I was doing this skull, I accidentally got some brown in the background like that, like those little blobs there, then I could go back and grab some of my grey with my grey brush, and I could just get rid of them like that. Yeah, so you can easily adapt it and keep going backwards and forwards. So let's take a bit more of the brown and do a bit more of this skull. So just take a bit more on my brush. There we go. Pop that on. I'll just see if I can do this part of the skull because it'll be a bit easier for you to see. So that's starting to come together. And obviously, if it goes a little bit too dark, put a bit more brown on your brush. Try that. Right, I'm going to do this little eye socket inside as well. So I'm going to get my brush with a bit of that colour on. Try and find that lovely sort of sun shape that we cut out. There it is hiding in there. It's quite hard to see in there, isn't it? You can just about see inside that eye socket. And let's try and do these teeth. So you could paint them individually, or you could try and sort of skip your brush along them so that the paint catches the bits that are sticking out. I'm going to do that first and see how it looks. Okay, so you can see how those teeth are getting painted in. There's still a few gaps in between them. And then we'll do the same with the bottom jaw. So we'll grab a bit of the brown, a bit of the black, and try and paint that down. There we go. Now, you can also spend as much time as you like doing this as neatly and carefully as you like. Some bits will be easier than others. The skull's quite tricky because it's got lots of different parts to it. The backbone is really easy, so you could just start popping the paint on. Now, if you want to be really clever here, you could leave some spaces between each bone. So it's almost like I'm painting stripes. So I'm going to go like this. Look, I'm going to paint that bit of the backbone. Then I'm going to leave a tiny gap and paint that bit. and then paint that bit, and then paint that bit. And it's a little trick that makes it look like there are spaces between the bones. Let's do those little arches at the top that I stuck on as well. So we'll do one of those. Let's get a bit more paint, and we'll work our way along those. I'm not going to do all of these, but they give you an idea. So like that at the top. And then you can do the same kind of process on these paddle bones. So you could take a bit of your paint and try and put a little blob of paint on each part of the paddle bones. This is quite tricky, right? So I'm looking at it from a funny angle as well. I'm looking down on it. So I'm going to try and put a blob of paint on each one of those little squares that we scored when we were making the shape. You can see what I'm doing. It's almost like colouring in a chessboard. You're putting a little blob of paint on each one of those squares. Wow, that's going to take a bit of time. So I'm going to speed that up and do that quite quickly. I'll just turn it around so it's a bit easier for me to see, like that, and then I'll show you how it looks. Okay, so you can really spend some time playing around with those little paddle bones like that. And then you've got the ribs as well. They're nice and easy because they're long and thin. So as long as you've got a fairly small brush, you should be okay. And if it goes a bit wrong, you can always fix it by putting some of the grey back on afterwards. So we'll just put a little bit on those front ribs there. Okay, so we can see how that's starting to work. And then last but not least, I did say I've got some gold paint here. You could use kind of orange or yellow or even a bit of white if you wanted to. But all that does is it makes it kind of shine a little bit. So I don't want it to be really gold like that because that's obviously too much. But if the paint's wet and you start to blend it in, then it makes that stand out a little bit more. If it goes too bright, you can always dull it back down with a bit of the black and brown. But that gives it a bit of a sheen, which you tend to notice on these fossils. They've got a little bit of a kind of shine to them as well. So we'll grab a little bit more of that. Maybe put some on some of the other bones as well. That just lifts it and makes it look a little bit more exciting too. Okay, so if we spent a while painting all of that and getting it finished, the whole of that then would look more like the one I showed you before, like this one. And if you want to get a little bit creative with it as well, you could even paint some ammonites in the background. Now they find ammonites in the same pieces of rock that they find the ichthyosaurs in. Now you could paint little spirals, but if you're not very good at painting a little spiral, here's a little trick for you. You can actually scratch the spiral in. So I'm going to do one just about here. I'm going to get some of this goldy coloured paint. So this is a little bit lighter so that you can see it. And I'm just going to put a blob of it on the background. Then I'm going to turn my brush upside down and I'm going to draw a spiral. So we'll scratch it in like that. And then that tends to look a little bit more like an ammonite. You can see like that. Let's do another one. Let's do one that's slightly darker. So I'm going to mix a bit of brown and a bit of gold together. If I make this a little bit of a bigger blob as well. So there it is. I'm going to put my brush right in the center while it's still wet. And I'm going to draw a spiral, There it is. Okay. So if you wanted to scratch some ammonites into the background, you could also do that too. Now, when it's completely finished and all painted, then all you will see is some tiny little raised bits where we've stuck some of the tape onto the background. But that's quite nice because when they find these fossil ichthyosaurs, they're very rarely in a flat piece of rock. Quite often the rock has got cracks and it's got some bits that are raised and lowered. So that gives it more of that kind of effect. But you can see how it's fairly easy to get from this stage that we just finished with to the finished stage. All you've got to do is undercoat it with the nice stony grey colours and then spend some time painting your ichthyosaur in. Okay, and you could use all kinds of different effects on there to make it look more exciting. Okay, so hopefully you will enjoy creating that. You might have had a chance already to make some parts of it and to keep up with some of the bits that I've been making. If you haven't, then you can always have a little look at the recipe. There's a little recipe on the link, and that's got the step-by-step process. So that will remind you of the 5 different things we made. And then also, I know that Lizzie from the museum is recording this session. So if you want to have a look back at that later, and you'll be able to pause it and then go back and see different stages. So we've got a few minutes. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, or if there's any bits that weren't really clear, I can quickly show you those again. So if you've got any questions, if you type them in the chat box, Lizzie will ask me a few questions. Okay.
Darrell, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for showing us how to make an ichthyosaur. It's so realistic, despite being made out of cardboard. Really, it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, as Darrell said, if there's any little moments that you missed, maybe you were concentrating on making the spine as Darrell was explaining the skull or something. If there's anything that you'd like Darrell to just repeat quickly now, he's more than happy to show you that with a spare bit of card. So somebody's asked, could you do the bit inside the eye and stick it on before you then stick the head down?
Yes, that's a clever idea. If you knew where it went, the way to do that would be to use the skull to draw through like a stencil, so you knew where the eye bit was going to go, then stick the eye bit on and then stick the skull on top. That's really clever. Yeah, I didn't think of that. It's a brilliant idea. Really good.
And Felix has said thank you so much for doing this. So
it's a pleasure. I love it. It's my job.
I know personally there's a lot of things now that I'm going to try and find the shapes of. How would you recommend? So for example, we've learned how to do an ichthyosaur now. What if somebody wanted to have a go at doing a different marine creature or a different dinosaur or something? What would you recommend?
I mean, what you need to do really, first of all, is to find some photographs of what you like. All right. So it's very difficult to make something like this up because the skeleton is quite complicated. But if you go online and you put like fish fossil or plesiosaur fossil or, you know, any other kind of creature, then you have to try and break it down into shapes that you can build. So for example, I've got one right here. If I grab this, you can see this fossil fish here. And that's been made in a really similar way to what we've just made. If anything, it's probably easier. And you can see it's made out of pieces of card. There's a piece of cardboard tube down the middle. And I think on this one, I actually used a paper plate and chopped it up. So you'd got these kind of textures that you have around the outside of a paper plate. And that's just based on a photograph of a fossil fish. Or you could take something you might have noticed just over my shoulder. I've got another kind of local creature here, and this is based on a flying reptile called a dimorphodon. It's almost like a pterosaur. So you can see here, this has been made in a really similar way. Again, you've got the backbone made out of the little bits of straws. You've got a simple rib cage. This one has got these kind of bones that become the basic wing shape. And that was based on a creature that would have looked quite similar to this little model. So that's kind of like a dimorphodon would have looked. And that's another kind of Jurassic creature that they find the skeletons of here very rarely. But you could base it on any kind of animal you like. And all you need is some photographic reference to look at. So something that you can look at to work out the shapes that you need to build.
Fantastic. That's so exciting. And someone said that they're actually using crumbled up bits of tissue paper to add the texture as well. So adding a little bit of extra material as well that they have at home.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I quite often use tissue paper either to bond things together, so to actually go over the top of a model to make it stronger. Well, sometimes to push into a kind of texture as well. So you can do that. It's funny actually, because quite often with ichthyosaurs, if it's a really good fossil that they find, they sometimes even find evidence of what it's been eating still inside its stomach. So we know that ichthyosaurs fed on ammonites and belemnites as well, which look a bit like squid. And sometimes the hard parts of those fossilize within its stomach. So you can almost take a snapshot of its final meal and you can see what it's been eating the day before it died. So it's quite a storyteller thing, isn't it? You get an idea of a story that's based on that fossil. So you could even build up little textures like that too.
Amazing, fantastic. So we haven't got any questions about any extra steps. As Darrell said, if you want to come back to this, if you want to see one of the steps again, we are recording this session, so you'll be able to access it in the next day or two on our museum YouTube channel. And also, as Darrell said, he's also provided us with this fantastic PDF recipe, which can be found online. I shared it at the start of the chat as well, but if you come to our website, you'll be able to download it there. Darrell also has a fantastic website full of lots of other objects that are not just fossils, lots of other amazing ideas. I'll just share that in the chat too. So if you want to go and see what else you could make out of cardboard and other objects you have at home, then those are brilliant there. And just a reminder as well that the Lapworth is doing most of their family events online this year. So if you've enjoyed this session, keep checking out the social media for some of our other online events as well. A really nice question just to end this on, Darrell. What's the favourite thing that you have made?
Wow. Well, I've made literally thousands and thousands of different things, and most of them are made with children. So they tend to get left at the school or the museum that I'm working at. So I don't get a lot of time to make things myself, but I've got a few things kind of dotted around. I used to make a lot of masks, so I've got quite a few masks that are here that are my favourite. So I've got one over here which sits on my shelf and keeps an eye on me. All right, so there's a mask there that I made, it must be about 25 years ago. That's been here for a very long time. And there's another one hidden away here that I keep just because it took a very long time to make, and you can see that one there with all the details on it. Yeah, that's all made out of cardboard and all sort of little bits of junk and bits and pieces, so made out of similar things that we've used, but it's obviously been all painted very carefully. So yeah, these are some of my special things that I keep in my office at home. Yeah.
Fantastic. And we would love to see what you have been making along with Darrell, as he's been explaining, or your finished product when you have had time to finish sticking it down or painting it. So if you do want to share those with us, we would absolutely love to see them. Again, I'll just share in the chat our Twitter handles for both the museum and for Darrell himself. You could also share it through my email, which you get from registering on Zoom, or on the Facebook event page if you found us that way as well. We just love to see the pictures of what you've been up to. I've already received a couple, which is amazing. So again, thank you so much everybody for joining us this afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you again for some more of our online sessions, or also in the museum as well. That'd be amazing. Okay, so thanks everybody for your time, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.